everyone know where you're at?
Everyone here for this briefing?
Okay. Excellent. So we're doing databases ground to cloud.
Could I?
My name is Grant.
Do you mind if I?
Okay.
I try to make sure that I give people a good. Learn to say.
It's Buck.
Learn to say no. So I just thought I'd give you an introduction because we do have the American accents and all that.
Oh.
So my name is Buck Woody, and I'm from the United States. Probably could guess that as well. Actually,
what the?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't tell you this was coming. Actually, the worst part is I'm going to tell them that you're also an American, and. No, I just want to give people warning with that. I also do have a little different presentation style. Hope that's okay with everybody. Everybody in the splash zone, we're all good. I had a comment from SQL Bits, which did pretty well otherwise, but the comment from a British person was disappointingly unprofessional to the point of being distractingly offensive. So I kind of like that, and so, yeah, thanks. So I kept it as my signature block, is what I did. Yeah. Okay. We're obviously impressed because we believe all Europeans look like this, but are peace-loving people, right? And we just want to kind of give you a little overview. We're going to be talking about SQL Azure today, and a lot of folks think that the cloud or SQL, in the cloud somewhere is kind of at best a mistake, right? Maybe this isn't the route you should go with your data. Anybody believe that? It's okay if you raise your hand. Brad, put your hand down. Okay, good. Other people feel maybe that it's not a mistake, but what's the DBA going to do? What's the cloud going to do to my job? And I'm here to tell you that some people don't like things just because they don't like things. All right? There's going to be some people that just take the contrary view no matter what. It's like the guy sitting in church. And they were talking about getting some lighting in the church. So talking about buying a chandelier, but he had been sleeping through most of the meeting, right? And so he woke up when they were talking about voting on buying a chandelier for the church. And he said, I'm against it. I'm against it. And they said, why are you against it? He said, it's too expensive. Nobody knows how to play one. And we need more light in this church, all right? So some people are just not gonna handle the change. What I'm trying to tell you is exactly what you can and can't use SQL Azure or any cloud product, Windows or SQL Azure, how you can use it, and what are you laughing at? It's all good.
No one's let Annabelle in, right?
Yeah. You're not filming this again, are we? Okay, that's not Annabelle. Either that or the operation worked. Come on in, sir. Have a seat. But the idea is this. Your time is incredibly valuable. I want to tell you right out from the start, I appreciate you coming in and spending your day with us. I appreciate everyone. I appreciate Redgate putting this on. Let's give them a hand. Very much. Great folks spending the money. I appreciate your time. There are people here from all over. Some of you drove a long way. I came from Seattle, so I'm with Microsoft. Grant is from, where are you from? What do they call your planet?
It's Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, or Taxachusetts as we call it. But we're all IT professionals. Anybody in here classify themselves primarily as a database administrator? Raise your hand. That's what you do for a living mostly. Database developer. People who are managers. Okay, and you can raise your hand more than once. And people who are architects, people who architect solutions and so on for your companies. In all of our positions, we hold the key to the most important thing within a business, and that's its data. The data is the most important thing. We think that people are our most important asset. Whenever you talk to a company, they'll always feed you that line. People are our most important asset. People are not assets, they're people. Okay? Our most important assets is data. If Bill Gates left Microsoft, and he did, Microsoft keeps going. But if Microsoft lost its entire database of who owes us money and who we owe money and who works there and so on, we lost it, just lost it all, couldn't repair it in any way, the company would shut down, as would yours. So what's really our most valuable asset? It's the data. So as technical professionals, it behooves you, it's most important for you to advise your company about the best way to do things. So sometimes there's data that can go somewhere else, and we're going to talk about that today. And some days there are places that it cannot go. There's some kinds of data that we've all heard of the break-ins lately, right? All those security break-ins we've seen. That sickens me every time I hear it. You see the ones where somebody just didn't obfuscate a password well enough, or somebody didn't put an SSL security token on something. They make me furious because that's what we do. We've let our industry down if we do that. So your job is not to hate something or to distrust something. Your job is to learn about it, and my job is as well. So I'm not a marketing guy. I'm not a sales guy. I'm actually on the technical side at Microsoft. I work with large clients like Starbucks, Boeing, Nike, companies like that, and I help them with their architecture for decisions like you'll see today. Okay? And a lot of them are moving things to the cloud, not everything. We'll talk about that. This is a photo from my seat at the airline. No, basically things are going to be different than they've been before. And it's your job to understand it. It's not your job to like it. It's not your job to hate it. It's not your job to evangelize it. It's your job to know about it and decide where it makes sense. Questions on this before we get started? Okay, so today we are going to learn where things fit, where we use them and where we don't. This is a shot of Grant in his earlier days. He's had the corrective glasses and obviously lost a lot of his hair. All right, so let's get started on learning a little bit more about the cloud. All right, so that's back. We'll now go back to the real deck. All right. Oh, by the way, buck.woody@microsoft.com. You can get my boss's address from there for any complaints. He's got a file. It's okay. And Grant Fritchie, you can just get through Redgate. And by the way, all the people that I've been giving bad advice to about SQL and telling them my name was Fran Gritchie, I'm really sorry. I just wanted to apologize in public for that right now. All right. Everybody understands the concept of a database on-premise. I'm going to indicate that with this sort of orange canister. We know how the different groups of people work with our data on-premise. We're pretty good at that. You guys have been to lots of sessions with that today. We've seen a lot of different tools that cover that and so on. What we're going to talk about now is just a difference of where you put the data. This canister is going to represent SQL Azure. How many people have heard of Windows Azure? SQL Azure. And how many people know there's a difference? Okay. How many people know what the difference is? And I may call on you. You do?
One's an OS, one's a database.
One's an operating system, one's a database. Very good. That's a good way of looking at it. The Windows Azure is a platform. It has places where you can just write code locally, toss it over the fence, and Windows Azure will run it. 3 big components: compute, storage, and then something called the application fabric. Okay? Within the storage, there are multiple types. One of those types is called a table, a Windows Azure table, not SQL Azure, not a database table. Much more reminiscent of something like a NoSQL. You've heard of NoSQL. Any questions on that? Anybody know what that is? Okay. Some people have said that means not only SQL or doesn't have the SQL language within it, but all those things aren't necessarily true. Wrote an article on this recently talking about that. But the idea within Azure is an Azure table is kind of like NoSQL. It's a key value pair. Doesn't work the same way or have the same constructs as a standard database that we would think about, a relational database. So I'm not going to cover that today. I just wanted to make sure we all knew there's a Windows Azure and a SQL Azure. All of these pieces can be used separately or together. Okay? You can use Windows Azure Compute, storage, or the application fabric together or apart. And you can use SQL Azure with or not with all of those. Anybody uncomfortable with that? SQL Azure is basically SQL Server, 2008 R2, up in the cloud somewhere else. Somebody else is running this. It is not a virtual machine that's running SQL Server that you connect to. It's not like that at all. We'll cover exactly what you do and how you connect to it and what the pieces are in just a moment. But for all intents and purposes, from a developer standpoint, it looks like SQL Server. You will use the TDS layer. Anybody not familiar with TDS? It's okay if you say no. Okay, this is a protocol that SQL Server uses to communicate information back and forth. So if you hear anybody else talk about TDS or the TDS layer, sound all professional, it just means the transport layer. Okay, that's all it means. It uses TCP, transport is just like TCP IP that you have, uses TCP to communicate, and all communications must be encrypted. You have to use the use encrypted connection built right in. Okay? We're going to talk about the tools and how you use that. Beyond those two things, it looks like SQL Server to a developer. You have the select statement. You have all these other statements that you're used to. There's a lot of things that are not in there, and you'll see why in just a bit. Questions so far? All right. I view this changing 3 or 4 different audiences. Let me just pop them up. The first audience I view this changing is the IT professional, those of you sitting in the room. The people who are developers, or DBAs dealing primarily with SQL Server data. This changes your world because you do not have enough knobs and things for you to twist that you're used to. For instance, if you were to connect to SQL Azure, right-click the name of the server and hit properties, you won't see anything. In fact, you can't get to properties. If you right-click a database property and try to change it to single user mode, you can't. It looks different. Okay? So whenever I talk about SQL Azure or DBAs, they say, so what do I do? If my world is changing to where I'm not twisting knobs on the platform anymore, if the server is in fact gone, this is the picture of the shark cloud coming to get my job. Is my job gone? No, it's not. But it does morph slightly. It moves into things that you do care about, which is, do you want to tweak knobs? Or do you want to design proper indexes? Or do you want to help your data, your users and your company figure out the best data structures and the way to store things? Do you want to start learning a little bit more about what the business does? Remember I said earlier that our job is to help the business get their job done. That's why we're here. IT is not here for its own sake. It's here to help the business go forward. I think a lot of times when I go into IT shops, they've forgotten that. We have the IT folks, and they're over here, and the business folks, they're over here. I think the economic recessions that we've all faced have made us realize we're all in this together. Okay, we're all moving to the same part of the company. We've got to get whatever our company does out the door. People in the healthcare industry, raise your hand. Finance, manufacturing, sales, goods of sales, things like that. Other places like EDU, government, education and government, okay, so on. Okay, we need to understand what our business does. Have you ever heard somebody say, I don't know what the business does, I'm a techie, I'm a geek. I make our computers go well. I don't care what our business does. Hopefully you're not hearing that anymore. And you shouldn't be one of those people either. You need to understand what your business does, and that's what your role becomes. Your role becomes not to fight an evolution to something like the cloud, but to actually help people figure out where it goes. Keep in mind, what Microsoft is telling you is not that you're supposed to take the stuff you have on-premise and shove it up into Azure. I'm going on record to say, don't do that. Everybody comfortable with that? Anybody think that was the message from before? Anybody thinking, yeah, there's actually, you start getting that mindset, oh, Microsoft or Amazon or whoever all these other companies are, they want us to take what we have and shove it somewhere else. No, no, no. Okay? This is not replacing anything. It's an additional tool. Is everybody with me? We're going to come to where that fits in just a moment. All right, so that's the way the IT professional changes. By the way, we'll just give some questions, and if I've asked you this already, don't answer it out loud if we've already asked you this question. How many people think they know what business would say is their biggest problem with having an IT infrastructure? Not with IT company, not with the IT department, not with you, not with anything else, but the fact of having IT. What's their biggest bugaboo? Yours may be backups or performance. What do you think? Cost. Yes, sir. Data growth. Reliability, outages. Reliability. I don't understand it. It's the little black box that steals my soul. You know, right? They don't know. And they've got geeks like us. We make a lot of money. We're attractive. We're more attractive than they are. Right? And so they don't get it. Somebody else had their hand up. Security. The on-premise stuff, that's what they're worried about right now. It's what you're hearing businesses worry about. Okay? Physical security. They don't like change. They worry about the rate of change. Oh, it's not agile enough. Okay. I like it. You have your hand up, or you're just combing your wavy locks there? Oh, just the combing? Okay. Yeah, I don't have any hair either. I have wavy hair, but it waves goodbye, so it's it's all the thing. You know what businesses tell me their biggest problem with IT is? Licenses. Licenses. Now, we don't have to deal with that. We tell our company, go buy me X, and they buy X, and they whine about it, but we install it and don't worry about it, right? But they have to buy a license for the server, they got to buy a license for the operating system, they got to buy a license for firewall, every kind of license in the world. They have to buy all these licenses. So imagine you go to buy a car and you've got to license the tires separately than the chairs, separately than the steering wheel, and so on. And imagine how much you'd hate that process. This becomes a different world for them because now they're able to avoid licensing completely. And so are you. This becomes a cost model we'll talk about in just a second. How do the developers interact with this? Well, interestingly enough, When I come in to talk to large companies about SQL Server, I used to be on the SQL Server team. Then I was in the SQL Server field, working with large customers, doing much what I do now, except with SQL Server instead of the cloud. When I go in to talk to people now, I no longer talk to DBAs. I don't talk to developers. You know who I talk to? Architects and CIOs. They need a developer and a credit card, and they can get started. Another reason you should learn more about any cloud, not just Microsoft's, but anybody's, because they're going to go do it. And you need to help them. You need to help them do it right. Okay? So the developer's world becomes different because now they basically just use the tools they have. They go straight to the database. They bypass the DBA, the data developer. Get in there now and explain I can still help. There's still a place for good design, still a place for good indexes, and so on. How do the users change? This is interesting. At least in the US, and it's perhaps true in Europe as well, the idea is that workers are everywhere. They can be anywhere. I work from home. I don't actually go into Microsoft that often, mostly because they don't want me to. But a lot of pepper spray, it's a long story. But the idea is that people can be anywhere. And we'll talk about this in the use cases. That's very interesting in just a moment. But the point is the users become very mobile. Right now, if they want to access your data, what do they have to do? VPN or firewalls or install some client or buy another license from a company to let you into your network. Now you've let somebody into your network to access not just the data, but Lord knows what else, right? So they're changing. Because of using SQL Azure, they don't have to come in anymore. They don't need to come into your organization at all. And finally, the billing model we talked about. So let's assume we sell hot dogs, right? And we're down at the market and we're selling hot dogs. We know that it costs 5 pence for a hot dog and 20 pence for the bun or something. And so we know we can sell the hot dog for £1 and we got 75 pence of profit, right? Makes sense? And every hot dog I sell, I just take out the 25p and I'm in good shape. Everybody with me? Right now, how do you determine profitability on a system, a database system, that may serve 10,000 people one day and one person the next? And by the way, this happens all the time. We have scalability things where this happens all the time. Super Bowl Sunday in the United States is a lot like the World Cup here, except that we stay inside and eat pizza. We just go one day. This whole idea of a week thing, we don't have that kind of attention span. So it's just one day. It's actually just one game. So that's basically the way that works. And we have pizza places that want to be able to sell thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pizzas on Sunday, but not Monday. How do you build a system? You guys are technical professionals. How would you architect for that? What do you think? Thomas, what do you think? How would you architect? Somebody comes to you and says, I want to sell thousands of pizzas on Sunday, but not Monday. What do you have to tell them if they're going to build something? You got to have something that handles the 10,000. You just do. What about Monday? Sorry, right? This becomes different. Every pizza I sell, I can grow Azure out, and then I could turn it off as I don't need it. That becomes a big deal. It may not be a big deal to you, but it's a big deal for the person writing the check. And it has the ability to automatically scale. You can watch itself and get bigger and smaller. We'll talk about that in a minute. Any questions about the differences? Conceptually, I want you to understand that it's basically SQL Server somewhere else. I'll get underneath that in just a second. Is everybody comfortable with that? Questions on this? Grant, did you have any questions? Okay. All right, so now let's talk about, oh, go ahead.
If we were to equate SQL Azure growth capacity to a database growth, can you say how much you want it to grow each time it needs to, or that there is a limit to how much it should grow to limit your budget?
So the question has been asked, how do we handle auto growth, basically? I want to grow in size, is what we think of with SQL Server, in database size. SQL Azure has specific database sizes. They're actually quite restrictive. And we'll talk about this in just a few moments about how you stitch those together. But you basically pay for the database size averaged for the month. Right? And so you pay by the database and by the size. So we're not going to get into a lot of costing here. I'll point you to some models for that. But that's basically the way it works. You no longer worry about setting auto growth. We do that. Again, a lot of the infrastructure stuff kind of goes away. Other questions on this before we get to that? Yes, sir. What would happen if you had a runaway temp DB? Hold that question. If I don't answer it, ask it again. I'm going to cover that in just a second. Yes, sir.
One question on the policy. You handle 10,000 pieces.
Yeah.
Some horsepower.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the question has been asked, and I actually understood it because it was with American accent. Yours I just made up. I hope I answered somewhere remotely close to what you said. But the question has been asked, how do we handle performance if it's the 10,000 pizzas versus the one? Who's managing the system scaling like that? I'll come back to your question. If I don't answer it, let me know. Yes, sir. Ah. Ah. Yeah. Yep. Great question. We're going to come to security because that's huge. I'm going to treat it all by itself because it's a passion of mine. Other questions on this? Yes, sir.
Currently we get lots of requests from the users. We have any data available. How do we use Azure?
I am so glad you asked the question. The question was, how do we handle the backups? There's no backups in Azure. Wait a minute. What did I just say?
You said that there are no
I
backups.
said there's no backups. What's the first job of a DBA? Backups. By the way, you don't have a backup plan. What do we have? We have a restore plan. Okay? Let me say that again. DBAs don't have a backup plan. DBAs have a restore plan, right? If you haven't written that down, write that down. Your last backup is not the last time your data is safe. Your last restore is the last time your data is safe. If you're not practicing your restores on a frequent basis, on a test system somewhere, I don't care how big your database is, if you're not practicing restore from time to time, your data is not safe. Do I have any question on that? It's not a SQL Azure thing, but that's a passion of mine as well. All right, good questions all. Security, scalability, sizing. Other questions, all right? Use cases. Ideal and use cases. How do we use this thing? What's it for? If it's SQL Server, what's the difference between this SQL Server and that one? Here are some use cases that I've run into that I've worked with large companies on. Now, there is a database product, so-called, that Microsoft makes called Microsoft Access. It's an awesome platform. You should try it out. By the way, I just said database platform and access, so I think Brent O just actually got hurt again by a unicorn.
Yeah.
Every time I say that, he dies a little inside. But here's the thing. None of you have this. This is all theoretical, and it's a stateside problem, but I'm just giving you some of the things that you might face if you ever go to the United States. Some companies, again, not here, there are some companies that use Access a lot. And some of them will have a little departmental database. And you find out about the departmental database when Bob from accounting calls you and says, I can't access the XYZ system. And you say, that's odd. What's an XYZ system? It's the thing everybody in our pod uses this. Our entire cubicle farm here is using XYZ, and it's down. And you're like, what's the name of it again? You research, there's no app in your company named XYZ. You can't find it. So you get into your car and you drive over to where Bob sits. You go to his desk. Show me the XYZ. He pops up something, you're like, I don't know what this is. You look at the ODBC connection string and it's pointing to an Access database under Jane's desk that she made right before she left and turned off her computer when she went on vacation. I know this does not happen to you, just stick with me. It's theoretical. It's all theoretical. And it happens in the States, not here. Because you guys got the big Falcon in the car, and we have the guy diving off the banister. All right. So what we did was this. I've actually posted an article on how to do this. I left their Access front end alone. Sorry. I left their Access front end alone because I really liked it. And it really worked for them. It was 5 people. And what I did was I moved the database part into SQL Azure. There's a wizard for that. They had to pay for it. Okay, we're going to talk about the backups here shortly, but there is triple redundant storage of the data. So the data is backed up 3 times for them automatically. And they've got a little department app, and I just pointed all the Access front ends to SQL Azure, all 5 of them. What did this do? A few things. Number 1, put the data in a format you can later consume into something else. Number 2, they had to pay for it. So you didn't have to go search for servers and licenses and firewalls and all the rest. Secondly, or thirdly, I should say, they were able to use it from anywhere. It wasn't under Jane's desk anymore. Now, even if they were at a hotel room, working, whatever, they just fired up their Access database, connected into SQL Azure. They didn't know that, but they kept using it, okay? Now, this is after a thorough study of the data to make sure there was nothing that couldn't go there Don't want anybody's social security numbers or national IDs out on the web. That's a bad idea. Okay? So it didn't have any of that. It was very, very calm data, stuff that wasn't harmful to be out. But it helped them do their job. So that's the first place I've seen that. How many of you have heard of Visual Studio Light Switch? Light Switch, a couple of you. You might want to take a note to go check that out. It's in beta right now. We're releasing that soon. It's a junior version of Visual Studio. Right now it's free to download and play with. Very easy, drag screens around, looks a lot like Access, but in fact it's C#. And it's building all of the C# code underneath for them that a professional C# developer could inherit and take over without a lot of pain. But it gives them a nice graphical interface to do all that. They grab a screen that has pictures of data grids on it, and they pull it on the screen. Looks a lot like Access, but it's building regular stuff. It will hit on-premise SQL if you wish. It will hit SQL Azure if you wish, or both at the same time if you wish. Okay? So Visual Studio Light Switch, you'll see some of your business people who are very technically savvy grab something like this and begin to use it without letting you know. Okay? So it's better to find out about it. The next one I've seen is a data hub. So the particular situation here had an Oracle system, a SQL Server system, and a set of ETL processes. Again, this is a stateside problem. You guys would never have this, but this is what they did. They would basically BCP something out or SSIS something out to a text file, a CSV, and they would put it on an FTP server. You know where I'm going. Again, you guys would never do this. They put on an FTP server. Company B would come over and grab the data off the FTP server, FTP it over, and then use the Oracle import to bring it in, munge the data, work with it, and the process would be reversed. Again, theoretical, something that might happen in the States. What we did was we found out there's a 4-step process, very breaky. Things are going to break. This is called a his, hers, and ours data problem, right? There's some data that's his, some that's hers, and some that we share. So what we did was we actually took the entire set of data, and using a process I'll describe in a few moments called a data bag, the code then would hit the on-premise SQL Server and the Azure server at the same time. Work with the data live. There was no transforming anymore. There was no exporting anymore. They're working with the data that they both cared about. They agreed on a schema. The Oracle system did exactly the same. So when they manipulated the data, they were doing standard RDBMS with all the right locking and all that sort of thing in place to make this work. That's called a data hub. There are lots of ways to do that. You could do it in-company or intra-company if you wanted to, inter or intra-company. Make sense? Questions on this? Okay. Another use case I've worked on is something called a shared storage app. This one was kind of interesting. They had a company that had an RPO, RTO. Everybody knows what that is? Recovery point interval, recovery time interval. If you don't know, objective, excuse me. If you don't know what those things are, go look them up. RPO, RTO, very important. Not what I'm here to cover today, but something you should know about. Basically, it said we need to be back operational within several hours. And they had a DR site and disaster recovery site and so on. We all have those kinds of things set up. But they wanted an even tighter RPO and RTO. They wanted not to lose data, and they wanted it to be live really quick. They called it their hotel solution. If something happened, our data was unavailable, we had to evacuate the building, could we continue working? So the interesting thing was they rolled off 2 weeks worth of data, and using Data Sync Framework, they kept it replicated to SQL Azure, 2 weeks worth. So from the time it would take them to grab a laptop with the interface, drive to a hotel, they could then be working on 2 weeks worth of data. That was the interval. So the big data problem the question we had earlier on the big data, what do we do with huge amounts of data? They didn't have huge amounts of data. So this made perfect sense. Again, we took care of security and so on first. Questions on this one? This one's kind of interesting. So that one's sort of a near-time disaster response kind of thing. But there's also the case of, well, there's some data I just want to keep somewhere else. I don't need it on-premise. Perhaps, and this is a different objective here, but perhaps there's another app that goes this way and actually feeds off that same data that doesn't need to come internal. So for instance, let's assume your users can look up your catalog, but they don't need to see things like pricing and so on. Not your pricing, not the internal pricing. You could store that subset of the catalog out here and key it back to a system on here and query across the two of them. Make sense? Okay. And the last one I'll talk about is a pure web app. So people ask me, what's the big deal? Why have SQL Azure at all? Well, unless you want to allow a web application to reach across the internet with that latency into your organization and access your data, Or you want to throw your database server in a DMZ, God help you, if you want to do that, and allow people to feed off the live production data directly, there may be a place where it actually makes sense to put the data and the code together. And by the way, this web app can be in Windows Azure if you like. It knows about SQL Azure as well. Or it can be in any web app. We've got Amazon.com servers where they just do a VM. They host a VM for you, reaching over into SQL Azure and querying data to keep their HADR available. Okay? So a pure web app, it makes perfect sense if you're going to put something out there and you want it to scale. The interesting thing is these are apps where things are stateless. If you're not familiar with the concept of stateless programming, you should get that way. But the idea is you've got your app here, you've got your data here. These are independent systems. Because you say, well, I could do this on MySQL. Sure you could. But if that system goes down, then the whole thing's down, right? So you want to separate these out. Questions on this? Okay, it's a quiet bunch. End of the day.
Say you have a portable application you can do. You want to look at move it, something like that, pure web.
Yeah. So the question was, if I understand it correctly, we have an app, and it is coming back into some SQL Server, and I want to move it from SQL Server to SQL Azure. You want the SQL Server part of it and even the Windows app part of it. I want to move the whole kit and caboodle up. Okay? Two answers to that question. There is a migration wizard for SQL Azure. There's also scripting built right in, and there's also tools from Redgate that will help you with that. That will help you move the data part up to SQL Azure. It'll scrub it to make sure you're not using features that aren't supported and so on, right? You take a look at sizing, which we'll talk about more in just a moment. For the web part, there's exactly the same thing. There's an ASP migration kit. That'll show you how to change it into Azure. Sometimes I've moved some apps with 2 lines of code change. Others take a lot more depending on how they were architected. Make sense? But yes, there's a path for both of those. And there's a path for keeping one, the ASP, the way you have it now, and putting the data somewhere else, or vice versa. Okay? Yes, sir?
I'm a freelance and I don't have any access to Azure at all. But I'm wondering if I've got a customer who I think might benefit from
Yeah.
this, how am I going to build an application for it?
Okay, the question was, I'm a freelance and I don't have access to SQL Azure at all. If I've got a customer that I think could benefit this way, how do I build an app? You build it in Express. You can scrub for the features that you're looking for, or do you have MSDN, Microsoft Developer Network account? Then you actually do have SQL Azure. Got it built in, and Windows Azure. You've got several hundred hours or several dozen hours of, depending on the subscription type you have, of free time already.
But I could build against Express anyway.
You could build against Express. Express will actually support more than SQL Azure, but you can be mindful of that and develop that way. Yeah, most people are developing using the MSDN account just against SQL Azure. Yep, absolutely. And it's a real nice thing because then you can either resell the access of your whole app and bill yourself for the SQL Azure part, or have them take care of it and get out of that business. Right? You want to sell your code, not database time. But you can do it both ways. Great question. Yes, sir.
What about latency between the SQL Azure and the
Great question. So the question was latency. How do I handle latency? And do you know the difference between a good question and a great question? Are you familiar with this concept? What's a good question? A good question is one I can answer. A great question is one that's answered on the next couple of slides. All right. All right. Okay. Let's go through the architecture of what this is and how it looks first. First of all, you have a subscription. You don't have a server anymore. You've got a subscription. Using your MSDN for practice or whatever, and then using an actual subscription that your users can go get themselves. They will get a monthly bill from Azure for the use that they pay. And there's a slider that shows you how to cost all this out and so on. This is assigned to 0 or more servers. This is a conceptual idea, the idea of a server, because there's not a single physical one, as I'll show you in a moment. This is Azure-wide, and you go to a portal, a website, to configure all this. We asked about security a little while ago. Who was it that was asking about security? Okay. There's a set of firewalls in there. No one's allowed in Azure by default. You have to go set a firewall rule. This can be done programmatically. Okay? But by default, nobody gets in. Okay? We'll talk about the multi-tenancy problem in a moment. And it's actually why this architecture is the way it is. This is your billing instrument. Everybody comfortable with that part? Next piece is a logical server. This server holds one or more databases. You pay for each database by size. Okay? It's balanced over something called a fabric, and I'm going to show that to you today. We normally don't go into that much technical detail. You guys are bright folks. How much time do I have? It's like 3 hours, right? It's 3? 3 or 4? 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
4.
All right, 4. Good. So I'm going to show you the fabric.
5.
And I'll let you out soon because there's like beer somewhere, and I'm sure we're in Britain. I'm sure I'm not going to be a sell against beer. Balanced over a fabric.
There is no beer.
There's no beer.
No.
Was that what we just said?
Yeah.
You guys aren't going to have beer?
There is beer. I'm looking forward to larger.
No,
I think
there's
these
no
people
beer.
were promised beer. Dude, don't do that to me. Have you seen these people? Look at Thomas alone. Thomas, stand up for us. No, he's not already standing up. That's a big guy. He'll mess you up. Don't tell him there ain't no beer. All right. This is your unit of geolocation. So we have multiple data centers, the EU, European Union, the US, and we have the Asian region. We have multiple data centers within those. You don't have to worry about what data center you're in. Things move around, okay? Latency was also a question. We're going to talk about that in just a second. This gets a DNS name, so you're not going to have IP addresses because that's going to wander around. I'll tell you why in a minute. All right? So you're not going to open a firewall hole to a IP address. You're going to open it to a DNS name that you set. You CNAME that out yourself. You give a canonical name to that yourself. All right. Next piece is the actual database. The database is where you set your users. You are in SQL auth only. Okay, that's being looked at for more things, but I'll just say that today it's SQL auth. Okay, you use standard, create user, and so on, create login, and the whole bit. So you can set, and you have all kind of roles and so on that you let people see things. This holds your standard SQL Server objects, tables, store procedures, all that kind of stuff. This is also your unit of consistency. We will keep you consistent as of the database level. We keep 3 copies of your data running at all times. It's always going across, always balancing, and so on. So when we do upgrades and so on, that kind of stuff happens automatically for you. You don't know what happened. You can find out some things through counters, but most things you can't. This is also your unit of multi-tenancy. There is, in fact, your database is mixed with other people's. Wait a minute, how do I handle performance? We had that question earlier. How do I handle performance with this? We do. We watch our fabric, and I'll show you the pieces in a minute. Again, I don't often show all these pieces, but I'll show them to you guys. The balance that goes across, we watch that and move things around automatically. Okay, that's another reason we keep, by the way, 3 copies of the data running so we can move it to different places. And this is your most granular unit. You're going to have a database edition, which actually equates to a size. All the features are identical across all the different, there's no enterprise or standard or whatever. Yes, sir?
When you say you have 3 copies running all the time, do you mean that sometimes you'll have more when you're moving stuff, or do you maybe have 2 and 1 being moved?
Question was, we have 3 copies of the data running at all times. He's asking, do I go to 4 if I'm going to fail over, or go to 2? The answer is yes.
So not 3.
Depends on the yeah, not 3. Does not equal 3. So it depends on why it's failing over. If it's failing over because there's a fault, you're going to have 2 until the next one's
So
up.
if you're being migrated to a...
Potentially.
You could have 4.
That we don't talk about a whole lot. Yes, sir, in the back.
Is there any data protection issues with the actual geolocation where the data is held, let's say outside Europe?
Oh, the question is data protection issues if the geolocation is outside of Europe. Define data protection for me so I'm clear on the answer.
Sensitive data, which I mean there are laws.
There are laws. Okay, it's a great question, by the way. This also goes to some of the security and the availability stuff we wanted to talk about earlier. Number 1, don't put sensitive data in the cloud, mine or anybody else's. Is everybody comfortable with that? Don't. That being said, if you've ever done military type encryption and so on, you don't encrypt the whole row. You encrypt the thing that needs to be kept secret. So you can actually tear your data apart if you do it right and put sensitive data one place, non-sensitive data someplace else, including the cloud. Maybe you want to do that. Maybe you just want to keep the whole thing. In the pizza example I told you about, where the company wanted to be able to burst and come back, they had 1 stipulation. Well, 2. They wanted to be in Java, which is fine. We run Java and Windows Azure just fine. But they also wanted to be able to have all of the credit card data never hit Azure at all. They just didn't want Microsoft even being able, even though we won't, they didn't want us to be able to look at credit card data. So basically what they did was we architected the app such that the parts that were heavy, that took all the hit, which is actually drawing the pizza, because they actually have people, you could grab a pizza and draw it, whatever you wanted, pull things down and so on. Determining the route and all that kind of stuff, determining inventory, all that. That's non-sensitive data. So that was all done in Azure. They kept their original system. Here's a web page. When I click I'd like to buy it, that call off of that web page actually went internal. So all Azure got back was a 0 or 1 that said approved or disapproved. That was all it got back. So that's the kind of data you want to store there. That's number one. Second part of that answer. The second part is there are laws. You guys have laws. We have laws. United States. We all hate laws because that means the government can go look at stuff. It's interesting. My daughter's been reading George Orwell, the 1984. Yesterday I took a picture of a truck here in the UK. It was right there on the Tower Bridge. That does cameras repair, and the name of the company is Big Brother. I thought that was kind of ironic. At any rate, we have availability to look at data. In fact, there was some stink made recently that, hey, the government says they can look at UK data if they have to, right? So there's all kind of protections built into place that things like that should not happen. And we all know what that means, all right? So if I've got something that sensitive, number one, I probably won't put it in a cloud database. Number two, if I do, you can encrypt before you drop it. And you can use your own encryption mechanism. And we actually have lots of articles and stuff that show you how to do that. But we will not fail your data, and this may be your question. We will not fail your data from one region to another. You can copy your data wherever you want. We will not fail from a European data center to a US data center. We won't do that. We will not fail from a US data center to an Asian data center, and so on. We will not do that. That's not an automatic, it's not even an option. But you could then create a database in Eastern Europe if you felt like it and put stuff over there, that's fine. But we're not going to do that. You choose the region. Yes, sir, you choose the region. We don't currently let you choose the data center. We don't publish where the data centers are for security reasons. We are, and we're going to come back to security. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and talk about it now. So there's 3 layers of security ever in a cloud platform. Level 1, you always want to make sure the facilities are secure. The Microsoft online premises, the stuff that does Office 365, Azure, SQL Azure, is certified through something called GFS, our Global Federation Services. This is at the ISO 27001 level, and it's level 2 certified. So we have a certification, and then we're audited on that certification. So this thing has questions like, what kind of lights do you have in the building? Because I don't know if you know this. I mean, I used to work in the military. The actual way the lights flicker can transmit data. The thickness of the walls are measured. The people who have access to the servers and how they can access them is measured. This is all handled by GFS, and we are certified on that front. Everybody comfortable there? Second, there's the platform, the code running underneath on top of all these servers in our cloud. That is not ISO 27001 certified because that's not that kind of certification. There are certifications being worked on all the time. Most cloud providers don't have those. There's a couple of reasons. One reason is whenever you encrypt something, you have to encrypt it with what? A key. Okay? Where do you get a key? Somebody tell me how you get an SSL key. You generate it from what? A server. What server? The one you're on. What server is that? Azure. Who owns Azure? Microsoft. Do you want me to have your keys? Okay. So you can get other certs, you can encrypt your own data, then load it in is the way I do that. The third level of security, so first level is physical, second is the logical. We did build Azure to the Trustworthy Computing Initiative, the TCI. It's fully compliant with that, okay? But don't read any more certifications into the operating system level than that, okay? The third level is the code you write. You can buy a Volvo, which I'm told is a very safe car, but you can take that Volvo off the lot and ram it into a tree, meaning you're not a safe driver. Same thing here. Everybody with me? So we were talking about security earlier, 3 levels. I have firewalls, I got all kind of stuff. I can throw more resources at you and will about security than you ever want to know. But then there's also the operating system, and I can throw a lot of resources at you for that. But then there's the code you write. You got to do it right, people. That's our job, okay? I'm preaching that a lot lately. Know your job about security. Understand it. Your company's looking to you. Your company doesn't know what a firewall is. They don't know what a cert is. They don't know what encryption is. They don't know what key rotation is. That's your job, okay? Remember when you said the cloud's coming for my job? No, it's changing it. And by the way, it's interesting. We had Hurricane a hurricane there in Florida, Hurricane Andrew, that hit the state of Florida where I used to live. And it took out all these houses in Miami. Whole neighborhoods would be flattened. Now, hurricanes are not like tornadoes. Tornadoes will pick out houses, normally trailer parks, because God hates trailer parks apparently, because they always go there. I don't know, what is that? It's like a magnet. So they tear up the whole thing. So the idea there is that when they go through, there was a few houses that stood, all the rest of them were broke. The interesting thing is why the houses stood that stood. Habitat for Humanity built them. You know about this organization? They're volunteers. You come in, they show you how to build a house, and they build a house for the needy, right? Do you know why the Habitat, the ones built by amateurs, stood, and the ones built by professionals did not? It's because the amateurs had to follow the rules. They didn't know any better. If they said you have to put a nail every 16 inches, they put a nail every 16 inches. Professional builders said, 18's good. Seriously, remember, professionals built the Titanic, amateurs built the Ark. All right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how this thing works. Here's the application. I'm going to stand over here and just let you watch this go. The application goes through the internet. How do we handle latency? How do we handle latency? You don't. You don't. You can cache things. You can do all kind of fun things. Don't do that. Build in apps that latency is not an issue. And we'll talk about how to build that in just a moment. But you're not going to handle latency. It's an unknown. You have no idea where people are that are using your app. You're going to go across the public interwebs with all the LOL cats. You have no idea how many LOL cats Grant is currently downloading right now. So you can't control it, so don't. Remember the Pure Web app? You stay on our backbone, you never leave the data center. Okay. All right. You come through the TDS layer that I explained a few moments ago, Tabular Data Stream, and you go through a TCP IP port, and you actually hit a server that's a load balancer. In fact, this is a security boundary. That's not really SQL Server. You think that's air you're breathing, Neo? That goes to something called a gateway. This is actually our fabric. It tears apart. You can think of this, please don't record this. You can think of this as sort of the query processor that tears things apart and turns it into the algebraizer, the logistics, and so on, getting things around. Conceptually, it's similar to that. I'm going to get so many people yelling at me about that statement. That actually then hits a SQL Server somewhere. Okay, we manage that using the TDS protocol, and basically we proxy the backend. This happens really, really, really fast. And these particular servers then provide the scalability, the fabric access, the control, and so on. Very comfortable with that? Questions on this? What kind of physical boxes you're going to run? I'm not going to tell you. What kind of network do you have? It's big. In fact, it's so big, we have the largest internet connections you can get into our data centers. It's really hard to do a denial of service because you'd have to have something that big. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying it's really hard to do. You have a question? Yes, sir.
How do you stop naughty applications?
How do you stop naughty applications? So there are several conditions that will cause your query to terminate. Lots of them. If you run away with TempDB, a question about TempDB, we'll shut the query down. You use too much memory, shut the query down. You stay connected for more than 24 hours, we'll shut your query down. Right with me? So we're going to show how to handle this in just a minute. Another question right behind you.
So you don't fail over between rapidly.
Correct.
How easy for us to synchronize data between?
So it's a big question. The question is, since you're not failing over between, how do we synchronize data? I actually have an entry I'm going to show you in a few minutes. There are multiple ways to synchronize data, lots of ways. Replication is not one of them. Some of you say, oh, some people say, thank goodness. But it's not one of them. Do we have another question? Yes, sir.
When you say SQL Server,
Yes, sir.
is that actually SQL Server?
It's SQL Server. When I say SQL Server, it's really, these are really SQL Server. This is fake. This listens on the TDS and says SQL Server. It handles the fact that somebody's not trying to send me a spoof on an IP and send me something that's not really SQL Server but looks a lot like it, even though it's using TDS. We stop that right here. We stop anything's not in our firewall, stop it right there. If it's not in the firewall, you don't get in. Okay?
Are you allowed to query all the normal stuff you would in SQL Server?
No, sir. As far as like you want to see things like memory and so on, the DMVs are dramatically reduced. You're not going to see file groups. We're not telling you that. I'm not going to tell you the files you have. But you have lots of other things. You do have locks. You do have query plans, the text query plans and so on. You can still pull out your most expensive query. We even have DMVs that are added in there so you can find out current billing information. And that'd be great for the gentleman who's talking about doing something independently. If you did want to resell, you could. You could mix customers and schemas and have one database that has your product and then mix your customers in and resell that whole thing as a package and be able to tell who's using most of your bandwidth. Yes, sir?
Say that you can't ignore the build
Yep.
in the background.
Say that again. The build? What do you mean by that?
The hardware.
Okay, right. You don't get to know the hardware.
Yeah, from DBA's point of view, you don't worry about
Yeah.
speed of rebuying.
Yeah, you do.
Everything else.
Yeah.
Is that compromising?
I know, isn't it? It's. I'm pulling the binky out, and we're going to learn to eat solid food. Yeah, and I know it sucks. It really does, because what we do every day, we sit there and worry about how fast the drives are spinning. You don't get to know that anymore. You have to know about efficient data use and so on. Now, if you're down to the sub-micro millisecond, nanosecond, number one, you got something wrong with your app. But number two, that's not meant for the cloud. Not at all. Your latency would kill you before that. Make sense? It's not what it's for.
You said that all is based on additions.
No, yeah, I did. I did say it was based on addition.
Are those sized by CPU memory?
No. So let me clarify. It's a great point. I said earlier there's no addition. It's just all SQL Azure. And then I said later you're billed by addition. We have a web edition and a business edition and so on. Those are just sizes. Those are just sizes. You don't get to know cores. You don't get to know CPUs. We move stuff around.
But in which case, do you get charged if you use more CPU?
No.
or more memory?
Now the question was if I use more memory, more CPU. No. As a matter of fact, I suggest you bury it. Your normal inefficient queries that you write. Yeah, it's fine.
On your pricing model,
Yeah.
what does that entitle you to? Do you have one account and you can have X number of databases?
Yes, sir.
Is it one database?
So the question was on the billing accounts, what's my billing instrument? The billing instrument is by database. The billing unit is by subscription. So multiple databases in a subscription, and there's a limit, there's a number, and you can get more subscriptions than one. You could give your customers each a subscription. Next one, I'll take one more, and then I got to move on.
If you build a whole environment where you've got database, application, server, web front end, everything all talking to each other.
In SQL Azure, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So,
With Windows Azure
okay.
an application.
Thank you for that clarification. The question was, can I build an entire application just put up in Azure? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the pizza thing, other than that one call, it's exactly what it was. It was scary for them. Because they moved from their cashiers being able to build pizzas and the customers building on the web, and then it came into their cashier system. The cashiers were using the web system too. Everything went there. But the neat thing was when they bought a store, the next day it could be operational. There's nothing to install. A web browser. By the way, I love Azure, I love Azure, I love Azure because I don't care what you people are using. If you got a picture of one of them fruits on your phone, that's awesome. Before I cared, now I don't care. All right, I got to move on. Development, how do we develop? First of all, connection strings and retry logic. You're going to have a longer connection string because it's going to include the name of the database and an FQDN, a fully qualified domain name. You need to code in retry logic. I have lots of pointers for how to do that because you may get disconnected because you got a bad query and it's misbehaving. I may cut you off. I may recycle that connection on you. You've got to be able to do some try-catch block stuff in there, okay? Something to know. Programming constructs. You do not have all the same things. CLR is not there, okay? Full text indexing, not there. Other kinds of things, not there. Every SQL statement, not there. There's a full list. I have a link for you here at the end. It's going to show you what you have and what you don't have. If you don't have something you need, see if you can make something else work. If it can't, don't put your data in SQL Azure. It's that simple, right? Most of the time you can. By the way, we release SQL Server about every 3 years. That's our cycle. But we release SQL Azure 3 times a year. And they're not breaking changes. There's no version of SQL Azure. It's SQL Azure.
It's only 3?
3 times, well,
I thought-
3 is what we talk about. We can do a lot more.
Oh, okay.
Last year at this time, databases weren't anywhere near this size. They're already bigger. They're going to get bigger. There's going to be more stuff. Yes, sir.
The July update has the spatial.
Yeah, spatial data type is now in.
Which is a great improvement.
Yes.
And a Denali first, well, it's pre-Denali, but a Denali feature.
Mm-hmm.
But there is that DMV that talks about the breaking change.
There can be breaking changes stuff. We're going to really, really minimize that, which is why we support such a lower subset. That's why we support such a lower subset. There is a DMV that shows you the things that would break.
So you're going to disconnect badly performing queries.
Yep.
How do you tell the difference from a badly performing query and a query which is doing a lot of work?
Question was, how do we tell the difference? You know what?
There isn't
That's a
any.
great question because there isn't one. Oh my gosh. So you're going to make multiple smaller trips, you're going to nibble it to death by ducks. Normally you wouldn't do that on your own server, right? But
Although
going
you
back to
should.
this gentleman in the back row, his bad queries, we just do that a lot. Yeah. All right. All right, moving on.
They just
How do we handle big data? 50 gigs, the biggest database you can get in SQL Azure right now. By the way, that was much less a year ago and much less the year before that. It's getting bigger all the time, but 50 gig, come on. Everybody tells me 50 gig. You got to be kidding me. That's a toy. And I go into their organization and they have one database in their entire 50,000 person company that's over 4 gig. And don't you look at me like that. You people got access databases running all over your system. But how do we handle big data? There's 2 ways you can do this. There are general approaches. These are not technical terms. I have more detail in other places. We're just doing some information here. Big data in a data bag. What you do is you start with the database. You shard it out by putting one customer set in one database and so on. You separate out your data. You query across that. No, you can't do cross-server queries, unfortunately, not right now. You put that inside a data bag. If you're not familiar with Entity Framework or LINQ, L-I-N-Q, learn that. You can bundle all that stuff together with other kinds of data, walk across the top of it. I'll be writing an article on this soon. And then you query that from your app. Another approach is something called federation and sharding. You leave the app alone. It thinks it's talking to a single SQL server, and there are various articles on how to federate out from this system. Those are the things you need to care about. Let's talk about how we talk to it. And then Grant, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. First thing you have is a portal. It's got a little web interface. You can go in there and manage logins and so on. There's also a portal tool that will let you kick over to a query window. You can see some stuff. It's interesting. I don't use it a great deal, but you can actually run SQL Azure with having no tools on your desktop whatsoever. You could do that. Again, don't recommend it. SQL Server Management Studio 2008, R2, and Visual Studio 2010 have built-in support. So inside Management Studio, you could query out and talk to SQL Azure, just like it was a regular old database. You can register it and all that. Turns blue, it's awesome. You can talk to it through SQL CMD, which is my current method, and PowerShell, which I use a great deal. PowerShell, the room? Everybody using PowerShell? Go learn it today. After you drink. It'll make a lot more sense anyway. We do support using SQL Server Integrated Services 2008 R2, BCP, and you can use something called the Data Sync Services or the Data Sync Framework inside SQL Azure. These are the things you can do. Yes, sir?
no.
Okay, so the question was, what kind of developer tools do you have? And then you mentioned Profiler, which isn't a developer tool. Absolutely. Things that will help you analyze queries, yes. DMVs are there. More things are coming from that standpoint. So query plans are being worked on, that sort of thing. But Profiler, no, you're not going to get that. You're not attaching the database at that low a level. I'm never going to give you that.
There's an amount of data going into SQL Azure and coming out and pick the billing.
Yes. There's a transfer charge between data coming in and out. It's a penny for 10,000 transactions or dime for 100,000. I can't remember which. It's pretty minuscule, but it's there. You do not pay for Windows Azure to SQL Azure. So if you had a pure web app, the data transfer goes away, just the size of the database. It's only for on-premise apps.
I think that the incoming traffic is not free.
Now, yeah, I should have mentioned that. The incoming traffic now to Windows Azure and SQL Azure is free.
In other words, you don't pay to put it there, you just pay to get it back.
How does it affect development if I'm using SQL Azure as your database? As far as what? If I have 30 devs? They're not. Say that again. Somebody get me a stick. No, I'm serious, because I'm about to trap him in a bad error. And you're an American, sir. You're embarrassing me, sir. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I thought you asked a different question. You just said, why wouldn't I have my testing or development database there? Because he's got an MSDN account. He's using his own. You got MSDN accounts for your developers. They're using that for testing. Do we let developers in production databases? Everybody go like this. Even the developers, everybody go like this. I want to see it. Okay. So yeah, they use the MSDN accounts. That's one of the strengths. You never develop against production. They don't have the logins. You don't give them the logins or the keys. Never give your developers keys to things. Yeah.
Especially
That's the MSDN database. And you could actually use data sync to move things from development once it's locked over into production if you wanted. And you give that person a key. One more question and I got to move on.
Yeah.
That's all right? All right. Hit me, Grant.
Hit me. All right, so we've been talking about the cloud and SQL Azure, and fact is Redgate's also pretty much buying into this whole concept of the cloud. So real quick, because I want beer too. SQL Compare connects to the cloud. SQL Compare connects to SQL Azure and allows you to run comparisons so you can do database deployments, and yeah, you can command line automate them and start doing all kinds of funky stuff like Imladen was showing us earlier.
Well, this goes to the question you just asked. This is one of the tools you could use to do something like that.
Absolutely. SQL Data Compare also goes to the cloud, and moving data up is free. Moving data down isn't. And so when you move data down from SQL Data Compare, you're paying for it, but when you move data up, it is free. So SQL Data Compare goes to the cloud. Finally, currently Microsoft does not provide any mechanisms for doing backups. And I know that Buck just told us not to put anything critical into the cloud, but let's face it, what is our most important asset?
Yep.
Data.
This poor guy's still buying his company's HR line.
Data.
You've stolen his pony.
Data is our most important asset, and you're going to want to back it up. For that, you have SQL Azure Backup. Again, that one's in beta. However, I haven't had it crash yet, so it's pretty...
So there are multiple ways to export and move data around.
Right.
We don't have the backup command available at the moment, but this fills the gap very nicely. Okay? So you do have this ability to work with tools you're familiar with already. And by the way, you said don't put anything critical on the web. I'm saying don't put anything sensitive.
Sensitive.
Yeah.
Sorry,
critical
bad
is
word,
fine.
bad word.
Yeah. Yes,
bad
sir.
Word.
In regards to your backup, how long do you keep the backups for? So say some field say I've had an issue, I need to revert my database. Can you like revert it back like 30 days and that? Or what is your, you've got these three databases going side by side. What is your retention policy?
So we can talk offline about the retention policy and what we'll do for various customers. You should think that backups are your concern. Okay? We do have the ability as well, we've written some code to where you could extract the data and then put it over in Azure storage as well. Or you could send it to Amazon, or you could bring it back local, whatever you'd like to do. But this tool will help you do that as well.
Let me also mention two other tools, both developed by Redgate for cloud use. One is Cloud Tally, which actually goes out and measures how much you've run up on your cloud. Right? There's a cost associated with data storage. There's a cost associated with data transfer. You can actually get that information emailed to you on a daily basis. Especially for developers doing MSDN, you can cross the threshold, and bless their hearts, Microsoft won't tell you.
No, we will.
Well,
We send you an email.
yeah, a bill,
Yeah. It's an email. That's an email.
but you can get that a little bit ahead of theirs because theirs only comes out once a month. So you can get it daily and know that you've crossed the line and decide whether or not you want to keep going.
It's just like your wife. Whenever you cross the line, she tells you after the fact.
Yeah, but my wife tells me,
Oh, she tells you ahead of time.
yeah,
That's a good point.
she doesn't wait a few weeks and then come up with a list. Here,
Yeah.
here's everything
your
you've
credit
done
card.
wrong for the last
Give
month.
me your credit card.
The other thing is SQL Query. There's a thing we have. It's another little beta test, but you guys might want to check it out, called Query Anywhere, which allows you to run queries in the web, in the cloud, against the cloud. It's cool. I mean, but it's fun. Anyway, so Redgate does cover you ground to cloud.
Yeah, good stuff. And we'll close out by, I want to leave this up. Write these down if you would. This first thing is a little URL here. This will take you to my Azure Learning Plan. There's a section on there called SQL Azure. Click on that. There's one there called Use Cases. Click on that. You'll get a lot of this information. You guys have been fantastic. Thank you very much for sitting in this room, for coming to hear us speak. I really appreciate your time. I want you to know that. I really respect you guys a great deal. And go out there and have a good time.
Oh, but they let the other class out first, and
Yeah, no, there's no
they've
beer.
drank all
Yeah.
the beer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks, guys.